Welcome to the Birth Launch Podcast, an empowering space for expecting and new parents to hear candid conversations with experts and learn how to craft your ideal birth. We will tackle the scary and weird questions that come up along the way and provide answers that are driven by science and evidence-based recommendations. I'm going to show you how to redefine parenthood and choose what's best aligned for you and your goals. With 10 years of experience in family education and a master's degree in human development and family studies, I'm ready to help you navigate pregnancy and explore your birth options to free yourself of fear surrounding childbirth. My goal is to help you have an informed and confident labor experience, plus an empowered and joyous postpartum. Laura, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much.
I'm very excited to have you chatting with us today and talking to us about your birth story, because I think that you've got two places in your birth story that are typically right off the bat, from the moment we say them, they are scary: twin birth and breech birth. And I think that there's no doubt that these births require higher skill. And in some regards, they are higher risk. But I am vehemently against the fear that is automatically attached to someone having twins or a breech baby. And it is truly so joyous for me to have you on today, because I think hearing your story is going to be super empowering for people. Not that they have to have the same birth as you, but to know that A, they're not alone, and B, to hear how you prepped yourself, your mind, your body, your care team, your expectations, all of it around kind of designing this birth that you had envisioned for yourself. So, with that, let me hand it over to you, and maybe let's start with your birth story. Let's just lay out the foundation, and then we can dive into questions that I know people are having.
Sure. All right. So I guess I'll start kind of from the beginning, because I feel like my twin birth story is related to my first birth, because I had been a doula for about 5 years before I got pregnant with my first child. And when I was planning that birth, I knew exactly what I wanted. Like, from soup to nuts, I knew I wanted an unmedicated birth. I was a little timid to do it at home for my first delivery. So I hired a midwife, found the only hospital here on Long Island that does water births, and decided that's what I was doing. I hired a doula right away, probably when I was 8 weeks pregnant. Of course, as a doula, I knew how important that was, right? Lined her up, and she was actually, it's a funny story, she was actually someone who I took my doula training with.
Oh, yeah.
So that was pretty cool. And to kind of cut to the chase on that one, the birth went amazing. It was the most beautiful birth experience in the hospital. My wishes were fully respected. I had an amazing supportive midwife. It was about a 45-hour labor, which sounds arduous and brutal. And when I say it just like that, people are like, "Oh, that sounds terrible." But my perspective of it, that it was the most empowering experience of my life.
Oh my gosh.
And I went into my motherhood journey just feeling like even more invigorated, that like my body did that. I can take care of this baby. And I jumped right into like this instinctual mothering. And it was like a dreamy, dreamy experience. So I couldn't wait to do it again. And when I got pregnant with my second, it was a completely, spontaneous pregnancy. I had been planning it. And right away, I said, I'm having a home birth for this birth, right? That was what I wanted to do, knowing that I had done it in the hospital, in that way. So when I got pregnant, I was immediately sick 5 weeks in, or 1 week in, right? Because you find out and you're immediately 4 weeks pregnant. So 1 week in, I was so ill, and I was like, this is crazy. There's something wrong. I got to, see what's going on here. So I begged my midwife to see me early, the home birth midwives that I had been seeing. And I said, I need a sonogram. I want to check, make sure this baby's good. I need some sort of reassurance. And she was like, why don't you wait till you're 9 weeks to go for a sonogram? I was like, I can't. So I went for my sonogram at 7 weeks and 3 days. And sure enough, went right into that room, had a transvaginal sonogram, and there they were. I saw the two black sacs, and I was pregnant with twins. So called my midwife on the way home, and I said, oh, I'm having twins. And she said, oh man, unfortunately we don't do twins at home here. And so that was my first sort of like ounce of disappointment, was, "Ugh, I have to do this in the hospital." So pretty quickly, started thinking about like what I wanted for this birth. Knew I wanted a vaginal birth. I know with twins that high instance of C-section, but didn't want to have one being that it was just because it was twins. So I switched to the local midwife practice here. It's a large practice that delivers in a wonderful hospital here, and thought that that would be a great like balance, right? Getting the best of both worlds, midwifery care, but still having that like, oversight from an OB practice and making sure that I was getting that holistic care too. So I switched to the midwife practice right away and much had a straightforward pregnancy. Every time I went to the checkup or a sonogram, which felt like it was weekly, it was, you have two perfect babies, two perfect babies, two perfect babies. Like every single time, it was just, it was really reassuring. And I kept bringing up that I wanted, make sure that this is going to be a vaginal birth, right? Make sure it's going to be a vaginal birth, right? And from the get-go, again, mentioned to them that I wanted to have a doula. And so the midwives were kind of, saying to me, well, here when we deliver twins, even if it's vaginal, it's going to have to be in the OR. That's something that we require, just because if there's an emergency, we need to be able to prep you for a cesarean right away. So I said, okay, well, that's fine as long as my doula can come. So they put it in my chart. They said, yep, no problem. So and at every appointment, I brought that up. And, everything was pretty status quo throughout the pregnancy up until about like 32 weeks when they told me that one of my babies was breech. It was baby B, and they assured me, "Hey, there's still time for baby to turn." And I think because this was all sort of new to me, I had never supported any breech or twin deliveries as a doula, so this was pretty new. And so I just kind of trusted that, baby would turn, and really didn't give too much thought to what it would look like if the baby didn't turn. Until I got to 34 weeks and the baby hadn't turned, right? So baby A was vertex head down and baby B was still a breech. And as you get bigger and bigger and the babies get bigger and bigger, there's less of a chance for that baby to turn. And, at every appointment, I kept saying to them, like, hey guys, like, what happens if baby doesn't turn? What happens if baby B doesn't turn? Oh, well, we'll see. We don't really know. It depends on who's on call, who's here. Us, the midwives, we don't do deliveries. We don't do breech vaginal birth, but the OB team that we work with does. I said, okay, well, and this is key, right? Okay, well, do all the attendings, do all the OBs do it? Nope, only about 2 out of the practice. Okay, well, what happens if one of the one who doesn't do it is here? Well, then you're gonna need a C-section, and I was not okay with that. So I went out of my way to email the director of obstetrics, asked him for a meeting, and asked him if he would be on call for me when I go into labor. I said, "If you can do a breech vaginal birth, I really would like to talk to you about you coming in for my when I'm in labor because it's really, really important to me." And he said no, but he assured me that there were a couple of other providers in the practice that are willing to do, a breech delivery. So I was feeling so uncomfortable at that point, and there was so much mental fight going on in my head that I think I just got to a point of defeat. And this is another like big like lesson for me, as a pregnant woman and being so vulnerable and kind of being met consistently with this pushback and this like kind of positive reinforcement, what they think is positive oh, it's okay, everything's going to happen how it happens, don't worry, we'll take care of you, we'll have to just see, we don't know how it's going to go. I kind of felt, what else am I going to do? Like, what are my other options right now? I didn't have any. So I had to come to terms with the fact that I may show up in labor and not have an OB there that was willing to do a vaginal breech delivery. Fast forward a few weeks, and I went for acupuncture and did the breast pump and all the things to get myself into labor because I was so, so, so uncomfortable. And 10 o'clock at night, my water broke. Wasn't really contracting, but I knew it was my water had ruptured. I knew that for sure. I felt it, I heard it, all the things. And I was so excited. I was like, I'm done. I'm ready to have these babies. I was 36 weeks and 5 days. So I was 2 days shy of like that 37-week mark where they consider you full term with twins. And I had another week and a few days till they would induce me because I was like begging for an induction. That's how uncomfortable I was. That's how you know I was uncomfortable because before I was like, don't touch me with a 10-foot pole. And this one, I was like, get him out. My first labor, I was like, don't go near me. And this one, I was like, I'm done. So when my water broke, I was so excited. We got to the hospital at 3 a.m. and I was really not contracting that much. But, the midwife said, why don't you just come in? And I was like, let's go because I want to have these babies. And, I got there and I was really not contracting, wasn't really ready for any sort of like augmentation. So we agreed for me to just kill some time with my husband. We went out for breakfast. We actually went to McDonald's and sat there 5 o'clock in the morning and ate McDonald's outside because it was July. And it's like a memory that'll never leave my brain. And just had breakfast and got back to the hospital like right around shift change at 7:15. And when I got there, they were like, "Well, your dream team's here." It was like one of my favorite midwives and a doctor, an OB who was one of the breech friendly providers. So I was so excited. I was like, "Let's do this. I'm ready to have these babies." So we got admitted. I was about 4.5 centimeters without even contracting. And, we kind of gave it some time. I was up doing my thing. And by 11 a.m., I still really wasn't contracting. So now we had been about 12 hours since my water ruptured. And we had this like ticking time bomb of like, by 7 o'clock, this team is leaving. Right. So here we were, it was 11 a.m. And she said, "So, you could stay and we could give you some Pitocin and kind of get things started." I said, "Yep, let's do it." I knew what I was getting into. I had seen Pitocin used many times, previously thought it was the devil, but with this one was ready to get the party started. It wasn't afraid at all. So I got the Pitocin and it kicked in really fast. I called my doula. I said, "Can you come over, because I'm probably this is getting intense really fast." And knowing that I was already like 4.5 centimeters or so, I'm like, this is gonna go quick. So they came in and said, "All right, well, you're feeling things. We just want to talk to you about, this breech delivery." And the doctor who's here does what we call a breech extraction. And we want to talk to you about, what that means and what that looks like. And it was kind of interesting because I'm like, why didn't anyone talk to me about this before today? Right. But I didn't know enough to even ask these questions when I was pregnant. Like I just didn't. I just thought breech, breech is breech, not hands-on breech versus hands-off breech, right? So they came in and they said the doctor's willing to do it, but only if you get an epidural because it's invasive and it can be really painful. And I didn't have an epidural with my first, didn't really want one for this one, but I thought, hey, you know what? If this is my compromise for me to get a vaginal breech birth, then I'll do it. So once that Pitocin had kicked in, I was like, all right, I'll get it. The contractions were starting to get intense and I was really still like kind of ready to do this. Like, let's go. So I got the epidural. I was more afraid of getting an epidural than of delivering twins vaginally. And it was fine. I mean, the experience of the epidural was fine. And once it kicked in, I was like, oh, now I know why people get epidurals. This is pretty good, right? From what I was just feeling. And by 2:45 p.m., I was in full-blown labor, in transition, ready to go. I said, guys, I feel pushy, I feel pressure. Like, what's going on here? And they're like, yeah, we'll check you. And, when they checked, they were like, oh yeah, like we're ready to go. So we got to get to the OR. And then they said, your doula can't come. And I said, what? My doula's here. I've had this conversation with the midwives. It's in my chart. We've talked about this since I was 9 weeks pregnant. So I'm not going anywhere until my doula can come. They said, no, sorry, like that's our policy. No doulas in the OR. I said, okay, well then I'll deliver here. Nope, we can't deliver here. We're going to the OR because of the breech, the whole guilt trip, all that. And I said, okay, well, if we're going to the OR, my doula's coming. So it was a back and forth for a while, about 10 minutes. And then they finally agreed to let my doula come to the OR. And they wheeled me down the hall and I felt my baby's head. I was crowning with baby A, being wheeled down the hallway to the OR. Got right into the OR and pushed baby A out right away. So she was born like a minute after we got in there. A very easy, painless delivery. And they put her right on my chest and I, thought I would have some time to kind of sit there with her and bond. And wait for baby B to drop. But pretty quickly, they took her and said, we got to get this baby out. And I said, okay, is everything okay? And they're like, yeah, everything's fine. They did a little sonogram and said, baby, baby's transverse, baby isn't turning, so we got to get him out. And it was very little time for decision making. There was actually no option. It didn't feel like there was an option. And pretty quickly, the OB, stepped in. Right, midwife had delivered baby A. The OB stepped in and went inside my vagina with her hands and pulled baby B's feet into the birth canal. And that was probably one of the most excruciating feelings I've ever felt in my entire life. Way more painful than an unmedicated, first baby birth where I was pushing for 2 hours after a 45-hour labor with little to no, warning of that was what was going to happen. So when they pulled his feet down, I was like kind of caught off guard and confused. And then it happened again. And then it happened again. And it was an ongoing sort of maneuvering of pulling baby down, through the cervix into the birth canal and needing to make sure he was being born in the correct position, even in a breech way. So it was about 7 minutes of extreme, extreme pain, very, very invasive of them, facilitating that birth. I was pushing while they were pulling, but it was definitely, they were very instrumental in the birth. And when he came out, he wasn't breathing. They took him right to the warmer, the incubator warmer thing, and immediately started working on him. Now, keep in mind, I didn't know what I was having. I didn't know if I was having two boys or two girls or a girl and a boy. We didn't find out when I was pregnant. And so when baby A came out, we all said it's a girl, but when baby B came out, he wasn't breathing and nobody told me what he was. And I think my husband was so caught off guard by the whole thing because he could tell that I was in excruciating pain. He just kind of sat back quiet. And when he wasn't breathing, I think he didn't want to say anything either because we were all just terrified that he wasn't alive. So they took him to the warmer and started working on him. And then I kept saying, is he okay? Is baby okay? Is the baby okay? Is the baby okay? And then they finally said, it's a boy. He's okay, but we have to take him to the NICU. So they quickly brought him over, showed him to me, and then put him in the incubator. And that. And truthfully, I was just in shock. I was like, what just happened? You know, I kept asking questions, but it was just, they all seemed in shock too. And later on, my husband was like, I don't know how many times they've really done that. I really don't know. That doesn't seem like something that they were comfortable with. It doesn't seem like something they were experienced in. And it doesn't seem like something that they, would have done if you hadn't really pushed for it, which I was really glad that I advocated for myself, right? But I wish that there had been a little more support and education and kind of, experience from their perspective of here's how we do this, here's how we can support you. And, it was overall, the baby was fine. He was in the NICU for 3 days, had some trouble breathing, but it was a pretty traumatic experience overall, I would say. And it's interesting looking back because I'm like, that's all I wanted, right? That's all I wanted. And it took me about 3 years to forgive myself for, making that decision, not knowing what I was getting into. Like, how did that happen, right? With what I know and what I've seen, how did I not think to ask more questions about what that would look like and what my options were? Why couldn't I just squat and push my baby out? So it's been an ongoing, healing journey and one that, I finally feel like I'm on the other side of, but that's sort of you know, that's my story.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. Thank you so much for sharing that with us. I have so many thoughts. It's so interesting to me that both of your birth story, your first birth story was great. You loved it. And this birth story was like pretty good up until the breach actually presented and the doctors began intervening. And for anybody who knows anything about breech birth, it seems intervening unnecessarily. I could just cry for you with the amount of trauma that I can feel coming from that, right? Like your body was doing it and probably would have done it if these providers had actually been more confident in their own skills. Because I agree with your husband. What struck me very deeply about your story is I don't think your doctor was actually trained in breech birth. It seems to me like they learned one single maneuver from a single or singular resource rather than truly understanding breech birth and being truly trained on that. So it that really struck me when your husband was like, I don't know if they have actually ever done this before. I
Right.
saw them and they were not great at it. That is,
Who's never, from someone who's never been to a birth, never seen. I mean, obviously he was at
totally,
the first birth, but even him, he works in the field. He's a blue collar worker, and you can tell when someone's done something before and when someone hasn't, right?
totally,
Yeah,
totally. I think
a
that,
lot of fear.
I have a million questions, but I think this particular thing highlights so deeply why you have to be asking more questions. But you did that. So think about how the system is set up to not actually be forthcoming with transparent information because you did the questions. You were asking, well, what happens if this happens? And then what happens if that happens? And then what happens if this person is on call or isn't on call? You were doing the work, and even still, the system failed you. I love your question about why didn't anybody tell me this is what was going to happen with a breech birth before we were in this moment now? What are your thoughts about that? Did you ever have the opportunity for your doctor to share that? I assume you had many conversations where it would have been appropriate for them to kind of stick in like, by the way, just so you know what to expect from a breech delivery, here are the things that we do. This is what you can be expecting, and opening up that conversation for you to say like, "No, wait a minute. I don't feel comfortable with that," or like, "Yeah, that totally makes sense to me."
Right. No, I mean, definitely not. I think, kind of going back to what I was saying before, where it always is kind of brushed off, right? Like, oh, well, maybe they'll turn. We'll cross that bridge when we come to it. Like, we don't really need to get into the weeds of these conversations right now because we're not there yet. Right. And I think that that happens a lot, even when there's no twins involved or breach involved or, any of these kind of conversations in the work I do. Like, I see people are like, my doctor hasn't even brought up the delivery day and I'm 34 weeks right now, so I do think that there could have been a lot more coaching and kind of, information sharing about what that looks like in our hospital. Here's how we support a breech birth. It's not hands off, right? And what does that look like? And is it more painful than, say, just a birth without hands on, help or support or whatever you want to call that? Um, and I think I would have asked more questions about it. And I don't know that there would have been another option. Like, I don't think they would have said, "Oh, your option for, this other doctor is they support breech with no hands and they just watch and allow things to unfold," right? Because that's like you said, that's how it's done. That's how they're trained. It's not trained in a physiological breech birth scenario. It's a hands-on breech birth scenario. So I think that was part of my healing process is like, why didn't I ask more questions? But how are we supposed to know what questions to ask?
Yeah, like what questions would you have known to ask that you didn't ask? It seems like all the questions that came to your head, you asked and you were trying to get that transparent information. And, you know, like I say, I really think this system is designed to not support that dialogue between patients and provider in a transparent way. There is always something, whether it be policy or just the hope that this baby changes and they're not actually going to have to deliver a breech baby or whatever it might be for these providers. There seems to always be something that prevents transparent conversation. And so, you highlight a really good place where it sucks being in American healthcare because patients can do all of the work. You can ask all of the questions that you know to ask, and you still don't get 100% of the information. And right now, that just is a really kind of gruesome reality of what American healthcare is. Hopefully, we can get to a place where that's not the truth, but right now, that is what we're facing. So, Can you talk to us a little bit about the questions that you asked? I know you shared some, but what were some of the questions that, if there are listeners with twin and breech babies out there, that you were like, no, this is a great question to ask? Like, I asked it and it changed the trajectory, or it totally gave me insight to the hospital policy that I didn't know, or it turned me on to X, Y, and Z. What are some questions that people should definitely be asking if they're prepping for a hospital twin and or breech birth?
I mean, a lot of it's going to come down to like if they even do it, right? Because I could have been with a provider who was like, "No, we don't do that at all." And some
Yep.
people might take that as like that's the final answer instead of
Yep.
looking at these other places that, hey, maybe they don't do it best, but maybe they do it, right? And if that's a priority for you, then you may need to make a pivot, right, in your plan of where you're going to give birth. And the second one is looking at risk, right? And it's not just standalone risk. It's risk of a breech birth compared to risk of a vaginal birth, right? That's a really important number and factor to look at because we know that vaginal birth isn't risk free, right? And I was also factoring in like my recovery and having a toddler at home and these other things that maybe a provider doesn't care as much about because they're not the ones doing it, right? And so those were really important questions for me to make this decision. I mean, truthfully, I was pretty headstrong about it. Like I was like, this is what I want. I know what I want. Why isn't it done more, right? And that's a key question is why isn't it done more? Is it because of the risk or is it because people aren't trained to do it?
Yeah. Okay. I want to dive into that. Let's talk about, because you can see it just sprinkled all throughout your story, how limiting and restricting it is for women in their right to choose truly what is, I mean, it's your right to be able to choose how you have your baby, but not necessarily in the US healthcare. There, it's not always an option to find an OB who is trained. And so this lack of trained providers really does cause a lot of harm. It causes our C-section rate to go up. It causes people to fear birth. It causes birth trauma. Like in your story, had you had access to a provider that was a hands-off trained provider and they didn't need to intervene until your body or your baby told them, hey, we need a little bit of support. Instead, your provider went hands-on and caused a bunch of iatrogenic trauma that we could have avoided had she been trained and been confident in her skills and actually trusted breech birth. So we can see how it's a ripple effect that is kind of multifaceted and hits our
Mhm.
birth stats in many, many ways, all negative, unfortunately.
Right. And I don't even fault the provider, right? Like I wanted to meet with her at my 6-week postpartum visit. I was like, I need to find out like why that happened because I just could not let it go. It was like a nightmare, like
Yeah. Oh,
like I relived that moment over and over again. I even went so far as to call an acquaintance from high school who I knew was an OBGYN and I said, "Is this what you guys are trained in? Like is this what you guys do in the city?" Because I know she practices in Manhattan and we live out here on Long Island. I'm like, "Is this normal?" You know, she works at a very busy maternity hospital and she was like, "Yep, that's what we do." And in some ways that made me feel better, right? It made me feel better that okay, that it's not just happening to me, but then it also made me like question like why? Why is that the norm and accepted? And that is a narrative that I think we as doulas see over and over and over again. Why are we just accepting this as the best we can do for people? It's
absolutely.
mind blowing.
But then again, it's kind of like, well, what are you supposed to do? It's not like you can pay for your doctor to go to extra schooling. It's not like you're going to go in there and teach your doctor, you know? But as patients, I do think that the control that you do have is kind of what you did. Demand that you get the care that you deserve. And, it does come at some sacrifice. You talked about in your story, like, oh, if this is what I have to do to have a vaginal breech birth, then I'll just do it. And it sucks to have to compromise like that. But right now, we may be the generation that while we're calling the hospital's hand on things and demanding better care, we also do have to compromise a little bit to meet them where they're at. We cannot expect to go from, you know, 1% of births being vaginal births in the hospital system and having literally just a few breech providers across the nation to every hospital offering it all the time by all OBs overnight. Like this is going to be a gradual thing. Can you talk to us a little bit about the emotions that you felt? I think this is often one that makes people spiral because we don't expect it. So, what did it feel like, and what did your like inner dialogue, how did you navigate the parts of birth being told that literally these things weren't an option? Like, okay, you have to be in the OR, or I require you to have medication, which the whole idea of requiring a patient to have medication for a procedure that's not consented to by them blows my fucking mind. Like, it is something that I will never understand. Requiring a patient to have medication for your comfort is just crazy to me. But you met this opposition a couple of times in your story. Ooh, you even told, now my mind is wandering, but you even told the story of when they tried to take you to the OR and they said, but your doula can't come. You said, then great, we'll do it here. And they said, but you have to do it in the OR. And you said, great, so my doula will come. And they said, but she can't come. And you said, awesome, then we'll have my babies here. And they said, but you need to be in the OR. And you said, perfect, let's take my doula. Imagine if they had just said, like, yes, okay, your doula has been an integral part of this. They are part of your care team. There are rules in the OR, so as long as they are happy to kind of follow those rules, they can come. Talk to us about the emotions that came with those kind of speed bumps, roadblocks.
Yeah, I mean, I think that the emotions were higher when I was pregnant and we had these conversations because there was more time to like think about them, right? And when you're
Right.
under pressure, and this I think maybe a little bit of why we don't have these conversations prenatally, because then parents have time to think about them and ask more questions because they're not on the spot and it's not like an immediate yes or no, right? And they know that when you're in labor, maybe you're going to fight less, right? Maybe you're going to push back less because you're in pain, because you're a vulnerable patient, right? Because you're in a hospital gown, you're in the bed, all the things. And you're just like, you want to be done. So you're like, whatever needs to get done can get done. And I think that for me, that was a lot of like what I had to forgive myself for postpartum was like, why didn't I keep pushing back? I did push back in labor about the doula, but why didn't I push back about those other things? And truthfully, like the emotions, I don't think were really there in the moment because I was so like ready to do this. Let's have these babies. I'm done. And it really was a lesson for me as a doula that you can't put people on the spot like that. You have to know what your wishes are in advance so that you don't have to sit down and think about it. I mean, granted, there's always going to be things that come up that you didn't plan, right? But if someone had said to me, okay, so here's what this breech extraction means, I would have said, "What? Like, in my right mind?" And then I would have gone back to my house and done research, and then the next appointment, I would have said, "I have some questions about that because in the research I've done, I found out that it's not always necessary to go in and grab the baby's feet. Can we let the baby drop and give it some time?" And then maybe it would have been this back and forth dance, yes, met with resistance, but I think in the moment, I would have been like, "I'm good. I already did my research. I feel confident in declining the epidural because I'm not going for an extraction." Right? I would like to just deliver my baby on my own. And then you can help if we need to, have that help. But because I hadn't even thought about it, I didn't even know it was a possibility. I don't think I really thought I had a choice.
Man, that is so deep. It just shows that, well, it shows a couple of things. I do think that you're right about it being intentional that these things aren't brought up in prenatals. I think it's a couple of things too. I think, yes, some of it is that control, that power. That would be an abuse of power, I would say, but that power, that control. I think a lot of it too is that providers sometimes don't want to scare people. So they say, like, well, if it's not on their mind, I'm not going to put it in their mind. I'm not going to, like, I'm not going to bring it up if they don't bring it up because I don't want to scare them. Maybe it's better they don't
Definitely.
know what's coming their way.
Yep.
Where we know actually exactly what you said. And I kind of am the queen of saying the longer the runway, the smoother the landing. And I mean exactly what you were just explaining, that if you've already thought these things through, then you know how you feel about them and you're less likely to make a decision out of fear or pressure or just the awkwardness of like, okay, I'm on the spot. I need to like make a decision so I'm like a good patient or I'm not annoying or even if you're made to feel like it's an emergency when it's not, like you'll be able to discern these things like, but wait, it doesn't really feel like an emergency. Your tone of voice makes it feel like it's emergent, but the data that I'm hearing doesn't feel like an emergency. Can I have 10 minutes or whatever it might be? I just, I find it fascinating to see how the system, the bigger system, not necessarily your individual provider, although a lot of times they do play a big role, but the system at large is like almost set against us. And it's so frustrating. It just feels so like my head wants to explode.
Right. Well, it's like in my childbirth ed classes, and I'm sure you experience this too. I'm like, I guys, I really don't want to scare you. Like, I'm not telling you to
Totally.
scare you. I want you to have the facts. I don't want you to ever say, why didn't someone tell me this? Right? That is huge for me in educating people. And now I do it with my twin clients, right? And I tell them, and even so much where I'm like, this is what a breech extraction will look like. It's okay if you say, I really don't want to deal with that. I think I'm just going to go for a section,
Totally.
right? That's your choice, but you're getting all the facts to make that decision, right? So talk to your provider about how do they help with a vaginal breech birth? Not just do they do it, right? How do they do it?
Okay, along those same lines, when you were in the OR, you mentioned I didn't really feel like I was being told my options. I think you actually said there weren't any. Like my options were not being discussed with me. I literally was not given an option. They told me this is what we were doing. In the moment, you can't always think about what to do. So a lot of times you just do what you're told to do, right? If you could go back and redo that moment without feeling any sort of guilt or like, anything about yourself, what would you do differently to maybe take back the control of that room when it started to spiral out of your control, but not of any fault of your
Yeah,
own?
yeah. Oh, I believe me, I thought about this many, many times. I mean, the way that I envision it was like, I wish they took baby A and or baby A was on my chest still. And they said, "Hey, Laura, we want to think about baby B's delivery. Here are some options. Here's what we're seeing. Here's what his heart rate is doing." And then it'd been like a conversation, right? Because I think I would have said, like, okay, can I get up and move and squat and get back on my side? I was pushing baby A out on my side, and then all of a sudden I was on my back, right? Because when the baby comes out, like they put it right on my chest. So I was like kind of leaning back. Fine. What are some things I can do to help facilitate his descent without it being you're facilitating it? Let me facilitate that. Before it was a hands-on, like we got to get this baby out. So we're going in and grabbing him. Right. So I wish I had just said, let's take a minute. Right. It was minutes, like minutes between their birth. Their birth time is 7 minutes apart. So if you're not even including, right, like the actual hands-on part, that's a really short period of time. And I would have said, is there an emergency? Do we need to get him out quickly, right? And if we're not doing this way, is there going to be, a cesarean in the future, right? Like what are my options for giving this a minute? Are there any? It wasn't discussed.
Yeah, man. I think so many people find themselves in that same situation where you are aware that like shit's hitting the fan, but you don't
Yeah,
exactly know how to start, and you're just kind of looking around like, oh my God, what is happening? You know,
exactly.
one of my favorite tips is to pause the room and you can literally just say, like, everyone pause. And for the most part, most people do. And you can just say, like, I need somebody to explain to me what is happening. And, it works. It's very successful. That's a very successful thing. The thing is being able to kind of have the confidence to do that. Have a discussion with your partner before you're in labor that if shit hits the fan, either they recognize it and they pause the room, or you guys have a code word or a code look or literally anything to say, like, somebody, one of us should be able to pause the room because, yeah,
Yes.
these are situations where, if they had just explained it to you and you had the option to choose, chances are we might could have avoided the trauma of that breech extraction and or You might would have compromised because that's all your provider knew, and you would have at least been prepared for it, where a lot of the trauma came from the like jolting of, holy shit, what is happening to me? Where
Right.
is that pain coming from?
Right. And truthfully, this is a good lesson for partners is when you're in that situation to say, like, you speak up. Somebody else has to speak up because I can't. Right. And I held on to a lot of resentment toward my husband for not stopping them and saying, like, get away from her. Right? And he's a more timid person. I'm usually the one who complains and speaks out. And obviously, as a doula, I think he felt like I would be the one doing that because that's what I did for my first birth. And with the doula situation, I'm always the one causing the ruckus, right? But in that situation, I couldn't. And I really wish he had just said, everybody stop, get your hands off of her. It felt like I was like gang raped.
Oh my
That's
gosh.
the best way that I can describe it. And I'm like, why didn't someone just stop them? How could everybody just stand around and watch this? And I think that's a little extreme, but it gives you a little insight, I think, into what birth trauma feels like for people.
Yeah, and I think it is very insightful into the hospital system and that insidious, invisible power that it has over people in those walls of a hospital. People will act all sorts of ways in order to fall in line with the hospital expectations, even when they know what they're doing may cause harm. And I think it just is a reflection on the system at large. And I talk about the system versus individual doctors because like I said earlier, while individual doctors definitely have impact on us, a lot of their actions are driven by the system. And so if we could change the system at a bigger, higher level, I think we would see a lot of our care be better. But you nailed it. I am so sorry. I mean, that is just, it's disgusting. It really is. It's disgusting that people can go in being so educated, been so prepared, having done all the research, having had all the conversations, trusting their body, knowing what they're doing, and still have harm inflicted on them by the system, you know, without literally any further discussion. It like happens to you. Does that make sense? You did all this
Yeah.
stuff and it still happens to you and you just watch your control go out the window. That's horrible. That's
Yeah, and I
horrible.
think too, it's interesting to think about like when we have these plans for our birth that on paper go according to plan,
Sure.
but then what your perspective of it can be is really different. And truthfully, I've had births where from an outsider perspective, I'm like, you were a badass, you killed it, you rocked it, you're so strong. And my client looks at me postpartum and was like, that was horrible.
Horrible. Yes, same.
And I'm like, oh no, like I'm so sad that you feel that from your birth experience. And then the next time they're like, I'm getting an epidural at like 4 centimeters because I never want to feel that again. And it's just such an interesting perspective because it's not, we all have a different viewpoint of our experiences. We're the only ones who can feel what we feel in our bodies, right? And when I said what I said before about how I felt and the way that I'm looking at that birth experience, it sounds so extreme, right? But that's truly the only way I could explain it. And I think it just draws attention to the importance of listening to women and letting them be, the ones in control, saying yes or no, informed consent, right? All these things that we preach, but like the why behind it. Like, why
Yeah.
is that so important? Because we live with this for a long, long time,
Yeah. Yeah.
forever.
I mean, it also highlights that radical responsibility, right? Because you have to be able to speak up for yourself. It doesn't necessarily have to be directly to your doctor. You can have your doula be your safe space or your partner, but you've got to have somebody that you can be 100% transparent with. And when you're ready for the epidural, you should not feel any sort of shame or guilt or literally anything other than, thank God I'm about to get some fucking help up in this house. Like,
Exactly.
what? Like, give me an epidural if that's where you're at. let's get you some relief, right? But you also need somebody that you can tell, I'm really scared. I want you to talk me out of this. Or I'm really scared. I want you to tell me it's okay. Or I do not like the person that's in this room and I don't want to hurt their feelings. Let somebody else hurt their feelings. I will be the first to tell them, look, we've really enjoyed it with you, but Laura's requesting a different nurse. I think maybe just our values aren't aligned, or I think maybe the way that you keep presenting pain relief is not aligned with what her goals are. You can have this conversation a million ways and you don't have to do it. Have your doula do it, have your partner do it, but have somebody that you feel safe to speak up to, because otherwise you are going to look back on your birth and maybe say, I wish I had spoken up. I wish I had gotten the epidural earlier. I wish I hadn't gotten the epidural. I wish that I had the courage to ask, well, what does that mean? What is that tool? What does that procedure entail? And so, yeah, it's a combination of, I think, our system changing and doctors really listening to patients, valuing those transparent conversations, and then women having the courage and the confidence and the information to be able to speak up. But also, God, everything's a double-edged sword. Also, knowing that sometimes you do all that work and things still don't turn out the way that you had planned.
But I just also feel like when we do all those other things that we're gonna mitigate so much of this
Oh,
trauma,
totally.
right? And the percentage, right, we're not gonna eliminate it completely, but we'll see a whole lot less of it. And we lead our birth trauma healing circles here at Nesting Place. I attended the first one we ever did, and I was going as someone who works there, right?
Mm.
I was like, yeah, this will probably be good for me. My twins were 3, and wow, I did not know how badly I needed that circle. I sobbed like a baby and got everything out on paper, and then we put it in the water and we released it, and it was for me a pivotal moment in, forgiveness of forgiving myself, forgiving my husband, my providers, and not walking around with that heaviness anymore.
Mm.
How did that happen to me? Right? What could I have done different? What could he have done different? And it was really, really cathartic. And so I always encourage people to try to start that healing no matter how, far postpartum you are, because especially going into like another birth experience, like I didn't have any more kids after my twins, but approaching another birth with that carrying that trauma from a previous delivery is heavy and it can kind of cloud your vision, right? So we want to get really clear on what you want to do differently or that we're not pulling in some of that into this next experience.
Yeah. It can also come up in your future labors, right? It can come up for
Yes.
you emotionally or mentally or literally physically as well. Yeah, definitely healing your trauma. Okay, so I want to circle back to your groups, but before that, as we kind of wrap up the twin and breech conversation, I want to tell people a little, did you know? Did you know that 50% of bees are going to be breech? So basically, if a provider says that they deliver twins, that provider better know how to deliver a breech baby too. And if a provider is telling you that they can do something, yet they actually don't have the skills, that is really, really dangerous. So we never want to like pressure people into delivering a baby that they're not comfortable delivering. But I definitely think there's space for us to demand better from our system because, like I say, if you are going to tell people that they're safe in your care when they have twins, you better know how to deliver a breech baby because 50% of the time you're going to come across a breech baby in baby B. I think that's wild.
It's a big number. 50% is a big number.
Yeah, absolutely. 50%. I mean, that's half the time. If you're dealing with twins and 50% of them are going to have a breech, that's every other twin birth you're going to. In addition to that, if you have the breech skills, hopefully you're attending singleton breech babies as well. And this is how we kind of get that access out to people. We start to have providers that are interested in twin or breech, and then those go so hand in hand that that provider then can offer both types of birth to people. And hopefully we just see it kind of catch on like wildfire. I do think that over the years it's gotten a bad name. The term breech trial it's
Mhm.
controversial data, and I think we derive some good things from it, but overall the data really swayed the obstetrics care in a way that was not truthful. And it's not actually that much more dangerous to have a breech baby. So when you look into it, you find that a lot of people are being scared into certain births because of faulty data. Okay, I'm rambling. So I want to wrap up here. You keep talking about hands on and hands off birth, and we've talked about intervening before you need to and having skilled providers that know when to kind of just watch and wait for the body or the baby to say, help me, we need some support. Tell us about hands off versus hands on breech support and what people should be asking their providers to determine how their provider handles twins and breech.
I mean, I think it goes back to talking about how often we do this, right? How often do you actually help with twin breech births or breech births in general? How were you trained? Who trained you in breech birth, right? Because being trained by your, in your residency program isn't the same as being trained by, the Breech Without Borders or some other specific breech workshop that is, traveling the country or being offered. These are specialty trainings, right? And when we're passing down knowledge from one generation to the next, it can't be in the way we've done it over and over and over again, right? It's why I think more people are not doing breech deliveries, because they see it and they're like, you know, I ain't doing that. So asking how we're being trained is a key here. And then in terms of like, I think the difference between hands-on and hands-off, right? The term extraction, I don't think is something that people hear about or know about. And so I think it's important to ask that specific question is, is it an automatic breech extraction when comes time to the birth? It's almost like you would never expect a provider to immediately pull out forceps or immediately pull out a vacuum until it's necessary. Why do we accept that with a breech? So that, right, we know there's a time and place for these things, but to use them before they're needed to mitigate a risk that may be so small or maybe that the parent is willing to take on is an important conversation to have.
Yeah. It all comes down to risk. And you mentioned it earlier that, singleton, head down, first time babies are not riskless. We always think about low risk, but that is what it is. It's low risk. The risk is there, but it's low. But no decision is completely riskless. And I think it really does come down to weighing what risk are you willing to take? What access do you have in your area and in your circles? And what fits best to you out of those pieces. So Laura, truly, this was so enlightening. I think that your story is encouraging in a lot of ways. I'm really sorry that you experienced birth trauma in the ways that you did, but I'm very, very, very grateful that you are sharing your story so other people can hear that breech and twin birth is possible in the hospital, but also to understand what they might be up against and how they can best prepare themselves to truly try and have a positive birth experience in the hospital. Okay, so if people wanted to connect with you and they wanted to hear more about your story or share their story or work with you in the new moms groups, which our clients absolutely love. And you also have a tummy time pillow for people. So tell us all where we can connect with you and how people can continue to learn from you and work from you and get your products.
Sure. So I'll start with the nesting place. So my home away from home is the nesting place here on Long Island. We have 3 locations in Merrick, Farmingdale, and Yaphank. It's a wellness center for prenatal, postpartum, all things parenthood. So that's our Instagram is the nesting place LI. So please come follow along. We have people who reach out to us all the time and say, I wish we had this in our, community. It's like a dream come true for me. So we have so much fun there. Through the nesting place, we facilitate in-person and virtual 4th trimester support circles. So that's a 6-week group for new moms to connect with one another and learn from different professionals. all led by doulas. And as HeHe mentioned, her clients get to utilize that circle. So even if you're a birth professional and you want to tap into that to gift that to your clients, reach out to us through the nesting place and we happily would get you set up with those codes. We offer like wholesale pricing for doulas who want to give their clients that extra support. And then lastly, the TumTum. So TumTum is the first ever wedge. We don't call it a pillow because pillows are too soft. It's a foam wedge that is made for tummy time for parents to use at home to give their babies the support that they need for the early days, all through like crawling with different development friendly positions to help them feel more comfortable on the floor, designed with our team, myself, and my partner with the nesting place, and then pediatric physical therapist Marav Newman, who's been working with babies for decades and knew that we could do something better to support babies and parents with tummy time. So that is tumtumusa.com and tumtum_USA on Instagram.
I love it. Oh my gosh, you've got so much going on, but you're serving pregnant people and new families and new babies and new mamas so well. It's, truly just an honor to share this space with you and be able to serve our families, our new families alongside you. So, thank you for being on the show. Thank you for loving on our new mamas in the nesting place small groups just as much as we do. And for anyone who is watching the show or listening to the show, connect with us on Instagram. You can find me at Tranquility by HeHe or at the.birth.lounge. And we will link Laura's Instagram and all links that we mentioned in the show notes below. See you next week. Bye, y'all.
Bye.
Thanks for joining us. I'll see you next time on the Birth Lounge podcast. Until then, head over to Instagram and find us at Tranquility by HeHe and give us a follow. You can also check us out at thebirthlounge.com.